Transferable skills.
From Cackle Media, this is Transferable Skills. I'm Noah Mishkin. Today's guest is Matthias Mahr, who went from being a commercial director in the UK into a published author. His book is very interesting. There's a link in the show notes if you'd like to purchase it and check it out. Also, those who are tuning in on Spotify or on YouTube will be privileged to see the photo that is referenced in the middle of the conversation pop up on the screen. So enjoy. Matthias, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hello, nice to see you.
Let's start at the beginning of your career.
Sounds good. So I'm actually originally from Austria, just for the background, where I grew up and where I did my school, I guess. I then moved to the UK, where I live now, for my undergrad. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do at the end of that. So I became a strategy consultant because I felt that would keep my options open. That was a great start to my career, indeed, for all the good reasons that people normally say. So it teaches you how to think, it teaches you how to present, how to manage yourself in front of senior people, etc. So I did that for about 6 years. And then after that, moved into eBay in a commercial and marketing role. And then for the last 20 years or so, have been doing various commercial roles in a number of different consumer organizations.
You started in strategy consulting. What was that like, and where did you get your inspiration and mentorship from?
The bit for me that was maybe unusual is I started on a Thursday, I had a 2-day induction, and I was sent off to a client office on the Monday with a manager that I've never met. So I met him at the airport because I was based in London, it was out in the Netherlands. So I met him at the airport at 6 a.m. on the Monday. And I looked then, I still look kind of youngish, but I looked then about 15. So both him and then the client, when I turned up, didn't quite know what had hit them, what they were paying money for. But you get used to it. And strategy consulting at the beginning is all about data analysis and gathering data and then analyzing that data and interpreting it. And there's a lot of advice available for more senior people because in strategy consulting, it's pretty standard, as I said, to have this regular intake of new people who basically know nothing and immediately get shipped off somewhere. So there's a sort of informal mentorship program, as well as having a more formal mentorship program. So you do have somebody in the organization that formally looks out for you and is your mentor, if you like. But really, it's your first manager who teaches you a lot of what you need to know because they have to, because they haven't got much of a choice. But again, quite young. I was 20 at the time when I started, which, UK people start working reasonably young in those sorts of professions, but 20 was still younger than average. So I didn't know really very much about anything. I'd done some internships, but that's about it. So I was reliant on the more senior people on the team to tell me what to do. Obviously, I started asking questions, but I did literally show up at least the first few months, just kind of saying, hey, tell me what I'm meant to do here. And then you pick things up as you go along, because I'm naturally quite a curious person, so I will ask those questions anyway.
In those first couple months, is your job to sit and be quiet, or are you supposed to interject with your opinion?
It's less the opinion. I guess you're probably kept more behind the scenes at that point, so you're less in the direct client meetings most of the time, and you do, as I said, more the data analysis. So you are given big data sets. So at the time it was more Excel. Now you'd have obviously a lot of different tools, and are asked to build a model or asked to start interpreting data, or perhaps read reports and do summaries. So a lot of things, I suppose, maybe that today I would do on your behalf. That was the junior job of a strategy consultant. So it'd be interesting actually to know how it's changed today. I'm assuming those roles exist, but you use a lot more of those support tools that just didn't exist at the time.
Yeah, and like any era, there's always going to be new tools. The question is, how are you using them? Somebody that doesn't have necessarily an analytical strength or mindset, they're maybe going to get information, but superficial level. They're not going to be able to drill deeper and deeper to get the data and information that they're looking for necessarily. So it still takes the right experience and individual mind to be able to extract the most amount of value from these tools.
I agree. Having said that, I certainly remember at the time I was given literally a big pile of papers to read and highlight and summarize. So I guess that bit is no longer required or will be done very differently, I suppose. But you're right. You still need somebody who knows what questions they're asking and then what they do with that information, for sure.
And people used to traverse continents on horse and buggy. And that worked then. But once the railway system was invented and eventually automobiles, it's hard pressed to find many people traversing continents on horse and buggy.
You're right. And as you said, the core skills of, I suppose, strategy, analytics, structure, storytelling really is a big part of that, which in the book, again, is very helpful because I learned that from an early stage, is how do you construct a PowerPoint presentation, not just in terms of the slides themselves, but structure it so that you're telling an exciting story. to the audience at the end of that. So those sorts of things, again, you can clearly get AI support with that, but there's a lot of skills still that are needed for that.
Let's tease the book. Tell us the title and tell us what it's about.
Sure. So my book is called How to Be Moderately Successful. And the idea here is that this book is a career acceleration book, and I've called it Career Acceleration for Realists. It's quite action-packed. It's a lot of short, sharp chapters, each with an action in it. And why moderately successful, not super successful, which doesn't mean that I don't want everyone to be super successful, right? I just felt that there was a bit of a gap in the market in the sense that there are a lot of books out there that will teach you how to be really successful, written by CEOs, written by entrepreneurs, written by people who've been there and done that. But in your early to mid-career, while that's inspiring, it might feel quite a long way away from where you are today and may therefore be less helpful to get you to your next step in your career. So if you think of a career as a mountain to climb, my book will get you to what I'm thinking of as base camp of that mountain, which is quite a reasonable way to go. And it should get you a promotion. It should get you certainly many more skills that you have today, but it'll get you to that point in your career where you're comfortable, you've got hopefully enough money, you've got a role that you like. And I'm not judging what that is. That's individual to everybody. But let's say a head of role or a senior manager or maybe a director role, some kind of mid to higher level. And then once you got to base camp, which is this book, then clearly you can continue climbing and go all the way to the top where the air is thinner and it's tougher and so on. And there's plenty of other books for that. Or you might decide, actually, maybe base camp is a nice place to be because the food's good and the view's nice and you'd rather watch the other people struggle on ahead. And that's also part of the book is kind of, what is success to you? Why do you want success? Who's driving it? What are you trying to achieve?
But that definition that you're giving is actually really important because we often seek out to hear from the people that have climbed the mountain, that have summited, but nobody would feel any different or less value from somebody that even got to base camp. If you got to base camp, that means you're already motivated, you're doing the work, you've put in the effort and everything needed to get you to that point.
Yeah, I think it's the pursuit, but it's also, it's really making you think about what it means to you. Because I guess most people's career paths or career aspirations were, right, let's keep going as far as we can get, whatever happens. And I think nowadays, there's a lot more examples of people who get to a certain point and then they start thinking, actually, I'm kind of happy here, or I'm trying to do something very different, which I guess is also the subject of this podcast often. It's no longer all about, let's run as hard as we can, as fast as we can forever. It's more about, I guess, thinking about where that's going and why you're doing it.
So let's talk about why you're doing it.
It was probably about 10 years ago, I would say. And that's when I became more senior in organizations, had larger teams, and really started to get more into career development and career coaching for others. Partly as my role, because as a manager, clearly that is part of your job, but I also started doing mentorship roles for others in organizations and even for friends and colleagues and so forth outside of organizations, and started to really quite enjoy that because I really love developing people and seeing them grow. I found that some of the ideas and some of the stories and tips I gave people, they found quite useful, and I started writing those down. And that's what eventually became the book. So there were probably 20 or 30 ideas already in my sort of phone that's been lying there for a long time.
I think there is a disassociation or abstract understanding of what it takes to convert thoughts into actual authorship and scholarship for that matter. What does it take to convert general ideas and thoughts into a formal outline and even script?
I mean, I think it's quite similar to work-related skills to some extent, in the sense that you need discipline to keep it going. But it's the same thing. You start writing some ideas down, and then at some point that needs to be structured in some way so that you can fill in the blanks and you have a sort of outline that you then work towards, and you can start filling in the blanks, and eventually you get there. Certainly for a book like mine, a business book, where it's more going to be structured chapters, and then you need to have the discipline to actually keep going and get it done. Because once you start writing and you realize that it takes you a week to do 5%, and so then you think, well, hang on, that's 20 weeks plus extra time plus. There's a story out there that goes, a lot of people have a book in them or want to write a book, whatever, 10% of them start writing the book, 10% of them finish writing the book, and then 10% of them actually sell much of the book. So it's a big funnel, but the skills are not that different.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about your collaboration dial, talking about, success not being binary. It's not zero sum. It's not either all or nothing. So I'm kind of curious to understand how you turn that dial, how you understand collaboration dial. So do you mind defining that a little bit here?
Yeah, I suppose it's tricky for me to define it, because really the first part of the book is for the reader to define it, and to ask yourself the question is, well, look inside yourself. What actually drives you? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? Is it your parents? Often it is your parents, weirdly enough. It's, you or either directly or indirectly feel, oh, I must please somebody in my family somewhere. It's rarely sort of your friends, I think, because most people's friends couldn't really care whether you're senior or not senior. Is it yourself? Is it money? Is it a kind of prestige and ego? I think it's quite important to try and distill these things down and figure out what are those drivers that you have, so that you can then more go towards those, rather than potentially keep going for 5, 10, 15, 20 years without really knowing why you're actually doing it. It's quite a personal question that people need to figure out, I think, for themselves, rather than me being able to tell them what it is.
How much of this book would you say is less of a prescription and more of a general mindset that you're trying to get the reader into, for them to just essentially write the book themselves that applies to them using your rubric?
Yeah, so I should probably just outline really briefly what it's got. One section at the beginning on what does success mean for you, why are you doing it, where do you want to go. So that's one section, that's 1 out of 5. Then there's a couple of sections on just getting better at what you do day to day, which is more prescriptive, or at least more pick and choose, but actions that I give you, which is around managing expectations, managing your time, doing presentations well, strategy, decision-making, actions, proactivity, a lot of those kind of basic things. Then there's a section on working with other people, understanding other people, how to manage your boss, how to work with people that you don't get on with. And then there's a final section on how to find a better job, either getting promoted within your company and how that might work, or finding a job outside of your company. And that's back to the transferable skills bit. It takes my approach to things, which is very action oriented, and it transcribes that into a book, because each of the 40 chapters has an action for you to do straight away. Got a little box in the book where you can fill in your action, so you actually have it as a memento.
Incidentally, I do love books that have worksheets and takeaways that you can actually accomplish. I think that makes it more productive. There's a strong emphasis on bandwidth. What are your own non-negotiables when it comes to protecting your bandwidth? That's something that I personally struggle with, and I'm curious what your suggestion is towards that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how to manage it better, really the main key is to say no occasionally, which is very difficult for people, because it's nice to say yes, right? And it's nice to not disappoint people, as it were, and you want to feel like you're reactive and you're supportive and so on. But ultimately, the only way to manage it, once you hopefully get somewhere where you are asked a lot of questions and you're asked to do a lot of work, then it is occasion to say no, and to explain why that is, and to focus on the things that are most important. And there's one chapter in it called "Strategy is Deciding What Not to Do," which is, I love that phrase, just as you become more senior, because if you're in a company and their strategy is to do 15 things, that's not really a strategy. That's just taking everything that you could possibly do and just doing it, right? A strategy is saying, actually, we're only going to do these 5, and we're going to leave these other 5 behind, even though they're good ideas. That's the hard bit. The things that are bad ideas are easy to leave behind, right? But there's too many good ideas. So at some point, you just have to accept that even if these things are good ideas, you just can't do them, because otherwise the rest is going to suffer. So that's my advice, is somehow find a way to say no to good ideas, unfortunately.
How often do you apply these principles and this same philosophy to your personal life? Because where I struggle the most in this, the idea of bandwidth and saying no, is in my personal life, which can affect my professional life, right? It's about how much time capacity do I have? And when I'm devoting any of my capacity to a yes, there is a trade-off. It's what is it detracting from or taking from? How do you apply that same philosophy in your personal life? How do you say no when you care about the individual that's asking?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just coming. I'll come back to the specific answer to here, but it's just because it's triggered in my mind. In the book, there's one question at the front that goes, well, you can only do 2 out of 3 things really well at any one time, and they are work, family, and hobbies. It's really hard to do all 3 really well, because they all take a lot of time. So you kind of have to start by picking, if I have family commitments, and I really want to do well at work, I probably have to accept that I can do hobbies less. I'm not going to do a marathon as well as these other two. Or if I want to do a marathon, I'm going to have to accept to do a bit less work, or that my family has to suffer for a bit. Like, that triangle, you kind of need to figure out up front what's going to give, because you, in my experience, you just can't do all three really well.
That resonates personally with me because I think it was just yesterday, a friend of mine who happened to be a colleague at our business years back just texted me a photo from, it might have been 10 years ago. I was training for a marathon at the time, and he took a picture outside of my office looking in, and I was asleep at my desk. Because it must have been, towards the end of the training when I'm getting really up there, and I'm waking up at 3 a.m. and I'm running a lot, and then I'm getting to work, and I'm burnt out by 8, 9 a.m. in the morning. So it's funny that you say that, because I think that's true. Something's going to suffer. And at that point, I was devoting or investing more of my capacity and resources into that one hobby for that period. And it was coming at certain costs that also compromises a little bit the other two.
Yeah. And you said don't want to disappoint people. Then it might come to a trade-off of, well, what's harder for me? Is it harder to disappoint somebody, or is it harder to not do this personal hobby of whatever, running or whatever it is that I might have? And I think the more it sounds a bit detached and unemotional, which it kind of is maybe, but the more you perhaps occasionally write these things down, or at least think about it for 5 minutes, if I had to choose, which one do I pick? Rather than what people often do is they don't want to face into the choice, and they just try and do everything. And at some point it all slightly falls apart because you just can't. So the more you sort of accept that there are choices to be made and make them more consciously rather than trying to do everything.
I'd like to know more about what experiences influenced some of your writings.
I try particularly to lean heavily on the storytelling element. There's always a story with each idea, and often quite a personal story about when I took a flight, or when I went camping, or when I did some things at work. It goes in random places, but hopefully makes it a bit more interesting to read. So the storytelling element comes through very strongly, and is something I've done for a while in presentations, but also more recently, certainly leading bigger teams. For example, in my most recent role for a company called Trainline, which is Europe's biggest seller of train tickets, a bit like a booking.com for trains. I set up the international business, so that's everything that's not the UK, focused on Italy, France, Spain, and quite a few other countries. And it was there I had to do extra storytelling, because that was a whole new area for the business. I had to explain why that was important, what it even was, how it was different to what was in the UK. I've always enjoyed that storytelling element, and I've been doing more and more of that recently. Building a platform, a vision, getting people excited about something, and imparting knowledge through a story rather than through a sort of dry list of to-dos. So that's one example of where I've been able to use my previous skills, or the skills that I've previously acquired in the book.
Do you have elements that you're kind of following? Let's call it check boxes, that to tell a good story, you want to hit these marks?
Not formally, but I think anything that is genuine and personal is a great start. And I've watched a lot of leaders, and my previous CEO, for example, when they stand up in front of a big crowd of 500, 1,000 people and try and basically say, where's the business at and where's it going? They would start with a personal story of when they were a child or when they did something. So I think the personal element of a story is obviously a really great part, because it just connects it to you in a genuine way, but also normally connects it to the audience that you are with as well. The other bit that's quite strong, you asked me before about what I've learned, it's really working with other people, which I guess in every business you have to work with other people. Depends on what you do, but it's a key thing. Yet I still find that many people aren't particularly good at it, because again, they don't really take the time to understand how the other people they're working with, where they're coming from, and why are they doing what they're doing, and quite quickly go on a confrontational approach where, I don't know, you're in sales and you want to get your thing approved, and legal kind of gets in the way, and you're like, come on, legal, what are you doing? You're in the way of my sale here. But there's hundreds of examples like that in companies, and that can sometimes be because people work in different departments, or it can be that people have very different personality profiles, color wheel or Myers-Briggs. There's plenty of profiles out there. But people don't take enough time to understand that, and will quite quickly go confrontational. I think if you, again, take that step back, and there's a few tools in the book to help you do that, you will find that actually you can get on with most people because ultimately they're driven by either their personality or their targets or both. And if you understand what those are, then you understand why they're doing the things they're doing, and yours might be different. And then you try and find some kind of common ground.
There are many people that associate career changes with reinvention, but your book suggests actually that, compounding what you already know, your background and experience that exists already. That's the essence of this show, is not talking about abandoning one's background in order to pursue something different, but rather leveraging it. So I'm curious how someone might think about a career change as a form of acceleration, not a reset, as you suggest.
Well, for starters, if I look at myself and that recent career change, if you like, from a commercial role to an author, I'm using a lot of the skills that I had before in my new role, even though they are very different jobs. And that's everything from the kind of action output focus to actually get it over the line, to structure. I talked about the storytelling, the structure and craft and the whole thing, all the way through to the sales piece of writing the book is half of it. It's probably even less than half. And the other half or more is actually getting into people's hands, to P&L and pricing and ROI and how much is it going to cost me? What's my budget? So there's a lot of skills, in fact, most skills that I'm transferring across. Obviously, there's a lot of new things I need to learn because I don't know about publishing and distribution and some of the ins and outs. But I guess 80 or 90% of what I've applied, I transferred across from my previous role. So I would definitely agree with you. And I think the important bit for me, and one of the recommendations in the book actually, is to figure out what are your specialties, what makes you unique, what's your value proposition. And that doesn't have to be a specific role, right? That in fact, it's not a specific role really, but it does have to be something that is a little bit unique is my recommendation. And that can be a functional skill, you're great at digital marketing, or it can be a social skill or something, or a package of all of those. So I think that you're absolutely right that you need to use your existing skills and transfer them into something new, but you also need to be clear about what that package is, so it makes it easier for you to figure out what that other role might be, but also for headhunters or people that you speak to or whoever to place you or to accept that this could be a new role for you. You need to be clear about that as well.
Yeah, the headhunter is not going to solve the problem for you and tell you here's what you should be doing. They're going to help assist in maybe placement once they know very specifically what it is that you're looking for and find the organization that's looking for that exact set of skills and experience.
Exactly. And be clear about why that is. And you mentioned that headhunters, and I've worked with headhunters a lot, and they will be fairly single-minded typically on, we have this skill set that we need, and either you have it or you don't. Right. And you need to really have your story together to explain why you may not have the obvious path into this role, but because of the skills that you've previously developed, you can do this role for these specific reasons. So it's very important for you to be not just clear on what it is that you want to do, but why you are an attractive package for this different role that you're trying to get to. Yeah.
Given your natural strengths and learned skills, what job might you excel at, but are also exceedingly overqualified for?
You'd asked me in advance. I had a thought. For some reason, I hesitate to say exceedingly overqualified because I don't want to talk down this particular job. But anyway, I like travel a lot. I've worked in travel for a long time. I particularly like flying, as well as taking trains and other modes. But I just like that idea. I've always have since I was a kid to fly off somewhere. So to answer the question, I'd love to be an airline dispatcher. You know, those people that are standing at the gate when the plane's leaving, and their job is to make sure that everything is ready so that the plane can leave. So the people are there, the bags are there, the paperwork is there, the whatever else, catering and all the other stuff that they need, which you're going to ask, well, how does that fit with my skill set? But I think the action orientation, the calm under pressure, which also my previous roles, some of the commercial roles, dealing with lots of people, it's a bit of a stretch, but I've always fancied that as a job, weirdly enough. Now, you say exceedingly overqualified. Again, I'm pretty sure it's a qualified job that you have to learn to do. So I really don't want to talk that one down. But just as a very different type of job to what I have today, for some reason, I kind of fancy being an airline dispatcher. And I thought maybe in my retirement when I'm 65 or whatever, maybe I'll just do that 3 days a week just because it sounds fun.
And it might be a stretch, but actually I think that those are the ones I like the best. The ones that are a stretch because they're very abstract. They seem to come out of left field. which, sorry, is an American baseball reference. But
We've adopted that in the UK now, left field, so it's okay.
Okay. And so I think those are the ones that it seems surprising to address some of your insecurity of, I don't want to talk down to the individuals doing that as being overqualified. I've struggled that personally, like worrying that by taking this question public, one might feel slighted that you are saying you are overqualified for that. And at the end of the day, what I have said to other guests and what I repeat to myself is it's subjective and it's relative. There's always going to be somebody that is overqualified for every job that exists out there. And that's okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
If you have some tips, perspective on how people might even look at what they're doing today towards growth for tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm going to leave you with one thought on that, which is if you want to have a new role, particularly a higher level one, but a different one as well, then act like it. So the advice for me and one of the best pieces of advice I received 10, 15 years ago, I was in a head of role and I wanted to have this director role. And I kept complaining that I didn't have this director role. And if I only had a director job, then I would be able to do more in strategy and I'd be able to make these decisions and so on. And my boss said to me, if you want to be a director, then act like one. And that's always stuck with me, which is basically don't wait to be given permission to do this bigger job or different job, but try to already do it and act like that role, like as if you had that role today, because that will make it a lot easier for you to get that role. Obviously, that mostly works if you want to go up, right? If you want to do a completely different job, it's going to be hard to do your job today and a totally different job.
I don't know.
But
if you do a job that is beneath you, you certainly will be demoted.
So that might be harder. But yeah, if you're a certain level and you want to get the next level or a bigger role, then try and look at someone who already does that. How are they acting differently to you in terms of their thinking, their decision making, their way of operating in meetings, etc., and step up basically before being told to do it. And that'll just make it a lot easier to get that role again.
Fantastic advice. Very helpful. Thank you. So if you want to learn more about this, many of the other principles, suggestions, concepts, and applications that Matthias describes in the book, go out and get the book. It's linked below. How to Be Moderately Successful. I love the name. I think it's fantastic and it's excellent. It's available wherever you get your books. Thank you so much for being here today. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
I want to thank Matthias for being today's guest on this episode, and to you, our listeners, for joining us for this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.